The Austrian GP showed the bad side of the FIA's regulations yet again, and one of the most talked about topics immediately after the race was respecting the track limits. This is something that saw almost half of the grid receiving 5-second penalties, and the F1 drivers were left angered as they felt like the FIA didn't respect the regulation properly. That's why Aston Martin has lodged a protest to the governing body, and this move is definitely going to spark a lot of conversation, given the fact that the Austrian GP has renewed its existence with Formula One until 2030. Will we finally see a change in the Red Bull Ring's outlet due to the massive protest from the drivers? One thing that marked the Austrian GP, apart from Verstappen's dominance, was the penalties that were handed out to many Formula One drivers for not respecting the track limits, as per Article 33.3. This is the article that states that all four wheels of the car must be inside the white line, which for other tracks wasn't that difficult. But due to the nature of the high-speed turn 9 and 10, drivers often found it very hard to achieve this. What adds even more to the challenge is the fact that the modern-day cars now weigh a lot more, and the track hasn't changed ever since it was introduced in Formula One. Spielberg has been present in the sport for more than 20 years, but back then the cars were a lot lighter, which meant that they had no issue in heading in the corners with respect to the white lines of the track. This is a regulation that also caused a lot of controversy back in 2021. However, the stewards have gone the extra mile and penalised a lot of drivers for not respecting the track limits, something that sparked a lot of protests from the Formula One drivers and teams. Aston Martin has been the first team to officially lodge a protest to the FIA for not respecting the rule constantly and letting half of the grid walk away with no penalties, with one of them being Lando Norris, the McLaren driver who finished less than 5 seconds ahead of Alonso. The Silverstone-based team was called for a meeting that was supposed to be held at 6:30 p.m, and what is worth mentioning is that they respected the deadline by lodging a protest within the half-hour window during the provisional classification of a Grand Prix. Considering the fact that Aston Martin has a lot to gain from the protest, extra points for Alonso, and the fact that there's no doubt Norris has gone over the white lines quite a few times, this could actually turn out to be a beneficial and intellectual move by the Silverstone-based squad. But where seems to be the issue with crossing over the white lines with all of the four wheels? Obviously, if every driver does it, and if there have been more than 100 breaches of this rule lodged by the FIA, then that's not much of the driver's fault, right? This is exactly how the rest of the grid feels, as many have already started the talks to potentially change the outlet of the Austrian GP, but there seems to be one major issue here. F1 is not the only competition that races on the Red Bull Ring. This is a track that is often visited by MotoGP, for example, and if there's one thing that the bike riders hate, it's the curbs. For example, there could be a yellow curb, similar to the one that is present after turn 2, one that would discourage drivers in trying to push to their absolute limit in order to get the best time. But this would be only a particular solution to the issue, the weight of the cars in combination with the outdated outlet of the track. One of the first drivers who took the 5-second penalty after being warned a couple of times by his racing engineer was Lewis Hamilton, and while he definitely agrees that there needs to be a change on the outlet of the track, he pointed towards a flaw on his car that made him so uncompetitive in Austria. According to the 7-time world champion, there was an issue with the front wing, one that kept understeering the car in turn 9 and 10, which is why Norris was constantly complaining about Hamilton going over the white lines. When the McLaren driver was asked to keep reporting the issue, Norris joked that he'd have to be on the radio all the time, and after the race, he was quite surprised that Hamilton only got a 5-second penalty for the breaches he kept committing. When talking about this, the McLaren driver said, "Yeah, I was going to do a live commentary at every corner pretty much. Hamilton only got a 5-second penalty? It should be way more. He had about 4 strikes in one lap." But even with such commentary towards his compatriot, Norris couldn't help but note that the track itself is very tricky, and there's not a single thing the drivers could do in order to improve what they're doing on the track. That's why he continued to talk about it, as he went on to say, people on the outside, they complain, they don't understand how difficult it is to stay within the track limits. Yes, I guess you can say I did, and why can't anyone else do it? But it depends on what position you're in. If Fernando was behind me the last 5-10 laps, I can assure you that I'd have done track limits once, and then I probably would have got a penalty. It just depends if you're under pressure. When you're under pressure, you're pushing a little bit more. You have a little bit more of a slide, but that's just like a human error. But it's also like that's racing at the end of the day. I can assure everyone of that, so I don't have sympathy for the people that did get it in a way, but I also don't. Mercedes have unexpectedly struggled throughout the entire weekend in Austria, one that saw Hamilton start from P18 during the sprint weekend, and although he and Russell made steady progress through the field, it was definitely one of the most disappointing weekends for the Silver Arrows. To top that off, Hamilton complained about the state of the car all of the time on the team radio, something that probably angered Wolff to the point of the Austrian hopping on the radio and saying, "We know the car is bad, Lewis, please just drive it." Wow. But how does a team experience such a slump after receiving a double podium finish in Barcelona and being in the top 3 in Montreal? Obviously, Ferrari either made a massive step or Austria just seems to be fitting them a lot. But according to the 7-time world champion, the issue was with the car. The main reason being the front wing as to why he wasn't able to keep the car within the white lines. It's not often that you see a Mercedes struggling and failing to keep up the pace with McLaren, and Perez also had no issues at all passing Russell in the back, something that was reversed a couple of weekends ago. But nonetheless, Hamilton had a lot to say about his car and him not respecting track limits, something he feels should have happened to a lot more drivers, as he was also complaining about Norris going wide all of the time while being ahead of him. When talking about this, he said, "We took a lot of front wing. We knew we had a really bad rear end here, so we took out a lot of front wing to try and keep that balance so we could do a long run, go long, and we massively under-egged it. I was like almost full lock around the last 2 corners. Going into turn 10, it was just sliding and I couldn't do anything about it." But the massive disappointment for Hamilton was with the outlet of the track and how outdated it was compared to the new generation of F1 cars. As he continued to rant, "I think they need to probably find a new solution for this track. Years ago, when we didn't have the track limits thing, the track was much more enjoyable to drive. It's strange to be driving and have to almost comment on the car ahead because that's what the team have asked you to do. I think they did it in Austin a couple of years ago. That's not racing, right?" Many F1 fans would agree with Hamilton, as we were definitely stripped away from heavy competitive racing due to the fact that the drivers were warned that they needed to stay within the white lines, something that they had to sacrifice a lot of entrance speed to achieve. With this in mind, changes to the Red Bull ring are bound to happen, and with the latest anger from a lot of Formula One drivers and teams, the FIA has nothing to do but to react positively to these reactions. What do you think about the FIA's dishing out of the track limit penalties? Do you think that a change to the circuit is bound to happen, or will the drivers be forced to accept the new track limit rules and give up lap time to avoid receiving a penalty? Let us know in the comments below, and thank you for watching our videos.